Hey, hi Raj.
Uh,
I think
okay. Now it's better. It was a little
yes.
bit laggy
I
initially.
think I think people are slowly trickling in, so we can probably wait for a couple of minutes or a minute before we start.
Sure. Yeah, so while we are waiting, Kishore, I think this is brilliant because if you think about the thesis of outbound fury,
Mm.
right, you do small incremental stuff which just adds up over time, and if you're adding your own product on top of that, that's like amazing. Because if you think about it, this is a great way for people to experience your product. At the same
Yes.
time, the people are getting some value out of it. So
Yeah. That's totally the point, right? So we thought, obviously there are so many podcasts with CMOs. I think it's just a lot of things out there. So we thought just keep it a little natural, but also use the
yeah,
same platform, showcase the platform also a little more. So that was the main.
100%. To your point about CMO podcasts, like if you do a search on CMO, like do a search on like Apple or Spotify and CMO podcasts. Every single, because podcast is now the new in thing, right? Like
Yes.
that's why Clubhouse is valued at whatever, like a few $1 billion, right? Because it's becoming like written content is slowly kind of. I mean, there's still people who read content. Don't get me wrong, but because time is so short and of their sense, things like podcasting, video, things like that is basically taking off right now.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool. Raj, I think people have started trickling in. I would love to start it. Thanks so much for coming to the session. Would love to get a short intro from you in terms of what you do currently and also what's exciting about the new role you've taken up. And then we can kickstart the session.
Sure. So my background, I mean, if I go back all the way, I started off in engineering, and then I always make this joke that I moved to the dark side because as engineers, we always used to make fun of those. Look at those marketing people. We don't know what they do, right? And then I decided myself to become a marketeer. My journey has been very interesting. So a few anecdotes. I was one of the first PMM on AWS S3 before AWS, like before cloud became cloud actually. And I was doing my internship when I was in grad school, and my role was basically to come up with the launch strategy for AWS. The role was very close to PM, and I was like, "Ah, I want to like go all the way out, and I want to do marketing." So after that, I joined Cisco. I was there for 4 years. Um, I always call it an extension of B School because this is where I like learned most of marketing. And then after Cisco, I went to Google. Google, I was hired to launch we called it the next generation of Google Talk, which was supposed to disrupt the audio and video conferencing market. Now it has become Google Meet and Google Chat. We were supposed
Right.
to launch that product. My product got killed a week before the launch. And that product became Google, what we know now as Google Hangouts, basically. And then I basically moved to the GCP team, Google Cloud Platform team. I launched GCP at Google I/O in 2012, so that was an amazing, fascinating experience. I did that, like, I was at Google for 3 years, and then I got the startup itch. I was like, hey, I want to go and like do some stuff, work in startups. The startup experience was, if you have watched Silicon Valley, it was like that. It was like a
Mhm.
chapter right out of Silicon Valley. So that was like for 18 months, and then I was like undecided where should I go. I was like, shall I go to like a huge? I don't want to go back to a big company. And then I got an email from Atlassian, and I was talking to my wife, Madhu. I'm like, I haven't heard about this company. I don't know
Right.
what they do.
Right.
My wife was like, oh, I'm a big user of Confluence. Like, you should go and join them. So the rest is history. I was in Atlassian for 6 years, worked in every single product in the Atlassian family, did that. So one of the things, again, I'm giving you a long intro, but it's important from a context perspective. Atlassian was like a founding, you can say like one of the founders of the whole PLG movement, because they put this whole thing like a server software on the website for anyone to download before it became cool, right? I did the PLG for 6 years, and I was like, but one of the things I've seen majority of the PLG companies kind of struggle is understanding top-down and how do you marry the bottom-up with top-down motion. This is when I decided to go to Palo Alto Networks. So I was there for like a brief stint, and then I jumped ship and joined 1Password. I was advising 1Password for quite some time, and the way I got into 1Password is Axel were an investor in Atlassian. So was an investor in 1Password as well. The growth numbers, two things: the growth numbers, phenomenal growth numbers, and number two is the people. Those are the two reasons I decided to join 1Password. I saw a huge, tremendous potential in the product, both from a B2C and a B2B perspective, and this is why I'm here.
That's awesome, Raj. I mean, great background, and I have a set of things that I sort of written down to ask you. But the first question I had in mind was, when we think about marketing these days, it's just too damn hard, right? Because every category you think about, there are probably like 10, 15 players with VC funding in, right? And sometimes it's hard to differentiate just based on product, right? So I was curious, what do you think early stage companies should do to actually get the buyer attention right now in this age?
Yeah, if you think about it, there are two ways to get attention, right? The one way to get attention is to spend millions of dollars on brand and telling your story, right? If you look at majority of the big companies in the world, they do it to some extent. But for a startup, it's incredibly hard to do. Yeah. What do? You like cash crunch. Like how do you get attention? This is how the entire PLG movement basically started, right? Initially, the thought was build an awesome product and customers will come. But now it has become so competitive to get attention from people. Like how do you, as a startup entrepreneur, get attention? This is the whole thesis of Outbound Fury, Kishore. I mean, the whole concept of Outbound Fury is like, how do you build brand on a dime? And the way you can do it, I mean, there are basically what I call it, there are two levers. The first lever, which a lot of companies nowadays have realized is a huge lever and have started investing, is the content. When I say content, what you're doing here for Goldcast is basically getting content. Content is an amazing way to grab attention, because if you think about it, no one basically nowadays, I mean, there are very few people, like you probably have 10 websites you have bookmarked where you go on a daily basis, but the rest of the stuff you search all the time, right? So that's one of the ways you can basically use content as an effective tool to get discovered.
But even on that point, Raj, I was thinking about it, right? When we think about content at Goldcast, right? There is two kinds of content. One is like the thought leadership kind of content, which really makes sense for the buyers. But eventually, we are also pushed to that SEO level, like top funnel content, right? And we are like figuring out, like, hey, where should we focus on at the early stage? Should we focus on SEO level content, getting those backlinks, or should we focus on the content that actually makes sense for the buyers, but might not have the distribution advantage right now?
I think they both are important. So the way I look, I was just having this discussion actually. I was on a call with my content team this morning, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Content has people both an art to it and a science to it, right? The science to it is basically trying to, you start with like, what are the topics you want to build thought leadership on, right? For example, in case of Goldcast, it can be event marketing.
Yeah.
Right? You want to build like anyone searching for anything related to event marketing, Goldcast should come on the top, right? So you start with that to some extent. Like, what are the thought leadership areas you want to, be there? Like, when people are searching for this content, they discover this content and they come to your website. You want to get associated with event marketing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first step. The second step is trying to understand, okay, let's do an assessment of all the keywords out there, what people are actually searching for, right? That gives you not only an idea of, okay, I want to rank on Google, but also what customers actually are craving for, what kind of information they're looking for, right? Then the third piece, which is the art piece, it's not just ranking. You have to bring people to your website, right? And grab their attention. If you have like junk content, people are just going to come and leave immediately, right? So I think like brand building using content to your point, like starting with like what's the purpose of the brand, what's the story you want to tell, what are the keywords which are relevant for this story, and then creating compelling content which grabs people's attention is one part of the theory of outbound beauty.
Yeah.
Second part is social and PR. Like social and PR nowadays plays a huge role from getting your word out there. The third piece is what I call the flywheel model, which Atlassian had a flywheel model, like word of mouth, right? Like this is where like the whole concept of obsessing about viral loops and things like that. So those are the three levers you have as an early stage startup, where you don't need to invest a lot of dollars in any of those areas, and you can still kind of build your brand.
Yeah, so that's a good segue to this question, Raj. Curious, actually, what are some of your favorite B2C and B2B brands that you admire from your life so far?
B2C is, I'm obsessed about two brands, and I could give a tech example. Both are actually two are tech example. Apple is one of them.
Yeah.
The way they showcase their product, and the way they make you obsess about their product is something which every marketer like dreams about. Like, how do you build that for your brand, right?
Right.
Number two is Nike.
Yeah.
They're amazing at storytelling.
Yeah.
If you look at some of their ads, they're very inspirational. I think they have nailed the storytelling piece to some extent.
Yeah.
Third brand, I'm going to say, I'm not biased, but Google.
Got it.
Google has created some. They're not so much on the PLG side, but more on the brand side. Like some of their work on, for example, Chrome ads they have created.
Yeah.
Remember the first Google search ad? What is it called? Person something? Person lover or something like that?
No.
Amazing storytelling. So, like if you have to say like B2C and primarily you find a lot of example. Now the question is B2B.
Right.
who is doing interesting stuff on the B2B side? I would say Slack. I was a huge fan of Slack and how they did marketing and how they connected to their audiences. One of the interesting philosophies I have, and I've talked to other CMOs in the industry about this as well, there is a huge shift happening on the enterprise side as well. Remember, the Facebook generation has already entered the workforce. The new generation of enterprise buyers are more tech savvy, right? They more come from this school of bringing your own apps to the workplace, right? So whatever the old model, the old style of enterprise marketing is kind of changing to some extent. Because you have to remember, an enterprise buyer in the end is a person.
Yeah.
Like you and me.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so there is a shift happening in B2B marketing as well. I think Trello did an incredible job from that perspective. They took the playfulness of their brand on the B2C side and extended it to B2B as well. Atlassian also did it to some extent. Google, you can say, played the initial days, they did it, but now they have become more like enterprise, and they've lost that, you know.
But I think Trello is a good example of that, because I was reading about it, Raj. I think even though Trello sounds like a simple productivity app, I think they took a stance on remote work and like higher level stuff, right? Like they made a point of view on what remote work is going to look like and how Trello is going to support that vision. So I feel
Yeah,
like every brand has like a larger picture rather than just a
right,
simple product that they
right.
end up doing.
This is the example. As we're going to give the example of Nike. This is what Nike does, right? Nike is more about aspiration,
Yeah, exactly.
right? They don't talk about their product. They talk about like aspiration. So
That's
I think to your point, yeah, Trello didn't. Chrome, like Google also, like some of the Google ads is also. I mean, they show the brilliance of the Google ads is they showcase the product, but there is some kind of story, aspirational
yeah.
story behind it as well, which I think the creative lab team did like incredible job.
Yeah, but on that point, Raj, so from for a company, especially in the B2B side, to build a great brand, right? Like,
Mhm.
what is the right team structure? Like, what does it involve? Do you need a brand marketer who does that, and a solid product marketer to bring that story out? Is that like the powerful
Yeah,
combination? Right? Yeah.
yeah. I think so. Coming from a product marketing world, right? People think when they think about product, they usually think product marketing is the first thing they need. I think it's true, it's important. Like even if like when I talk like from a startup playbook perspective, where should you start? You start with product marketing. But I think brand also plays a huge role. A lot of companies don't pay attention to the brand as much. I think the companies which are really successful in the long run are they don't only have like good product marketing organizations, but they also have great brand marketing organizations as well. So to answer your question, like from a pillar perspective, I always have this because you know if you go to companies, they always think of brand as corporate brand. They don't think about brand as product brand. And I am from the school that investing in the product brand is super important as well. So when I think about org structures, I always think about like brand, content, social as like one pillar, right? Product, marketing, you know, paid marketing, demand generation as like the second pillar. The third pillar is what, you know, it's funny I use that term like the DevOps arm of marketing. Like this is the one like where you put analytics, you put operations, you want put program management, and then the other pillar is the technical arm of marketing. Because I think the technical arm the is becoming more and more important because if you think about it, the digital equivalent, your web store is your basically storefront.
Yeah.
So the technical arm is also super important as well.
Yeah. No, 100%. No, I was thinking about it recently. Now I am particularly very passionate about building a brand that stands for something, right? And people, when they see it, they have some connect to it, right? But it's funny. Now we are trying to sort of build pipeline for the company, right? It's very easy to like get into the trap of short-term goals where you like do paid ads, right? Let's do all the standard stuff. And even in weekly meetings now, right, you're looking at like leads, pipeline, and stuff. So it doesn't give a lot of room for us to like think creatively and take a bigger picture, right? So I was just wondering, Raj, I'm sure you also have the same problem, right, where you have to meet short-term pipeline goals, but also on a larger picture, you want to take a stance on how the company will
Yeah,
evolve for
yeah,
3-4 months down the line. So I was curious how you balance those things, especially
yeah,
if your team comes up with some ideas and stuff.
yeah. You really, honed on a very sensitive topic
Yeah.
because I think that is the bane of every CMO's existence to some extent, right? How do you balance short term and long term?
Yeah.
Because there is always this need of meeting your short term
Yeah.
goals at the compromise of thinking long term, right?
Okay.
So I think every CMO and Kishore, to some extent, Goldcast as well, don't forget the long term piece because a lot of companies are so focused on the short-term piece that they forget investing in the long term, and then long before you know, you have like competitors who basically surpassed you, right? Short-term is going to give you like a short-term adrenaline boost to some extent. Oh, you make your board happy, you make your CEO happy that you, but you cannot go into this cycle of short-term spending every quarter, right, and meeting your goals. So you have to think about long-term in general. I think what I usually recommend to startups is in the initial days, you should more invest on the long term than short term, like 20%, 80. And over time, you make that 50-50 when you feel like your long-term stuff, like long-term strategies are starting to pay off, kick off, and then shift to at least like 3 or 4 years from now, you go to an 80-20 model where 80% short term because you've already invested in building those long term.
Yeah. But is there like a do you have any suggestions for your teammates that, hey, you know what, you can go spend 70% of your budget, with pipeline, but 30% you have the complete freedom to do like whatever. Is there like a principle that you wish to adopt, Raj, in the team?
Yeah. So I try to what are you talking about? So I try to do 20%. I try to tell my team keep 20% always free because there's random stuff which is gonna come your way, right? Also, it's possible that you want to do some project on your own.
Yeah.
Interesting areas you want to explore, but that thing should be inherent in the organization because if you see one of the craft ethos I have in my organization is to take risk and failures. I think failures are extremely important.
Yeah.
If you're not failing, that means you're not taking enough risk. Yeah. You're not thinking outside the box, right? You're sticking to the model which has always worked before. But Bezos has this thing in one of his Bezos annual reports are always Amazon's annual report are always amazing to read. So he has this analogy, right? Like in baseball, for example, you can either miss or hit a home run, right? You swing your bats, some of the time you're going to miss. One time you're going to hit and you're going to hit a home run, right? Now, with business, there is no cap. Your home run can have infinite returns.
100%. Yeah.
So I think it's important that you build a culture of
100%.
taking risk in general. To your point, failing and thinking outside the box, I think is super, super important.
Yeah. No, because my other founder, Palash, who might be watching the show, is a very data savvy guy. He loves to dig into data. So he has now implemented those fancy attribution models now to figure out where the leads come from. So and then I was just thinking about it last week that, hey, if we try to figure out the impact of everything we do, it's hard to sort of come up with creative ideas. So that's where I had to take a stance on hey, let's figure it out together and split some budget for some creativity and remaining.
Data will not data. I'm a huge data-oriented person. Don't get me wrong. I love data. I use data all the time. But data only predicts based on your past behavior, right? So that's the problem. If you just look at it, Jobs had this famous saying that he doesn't read market research reports to decide which market to go after. Or I'm sure he never would have come up with iPhone, either with iPhone or iPhone.
Right. Raj, I want to take one question which is slightly very relevant to what you're talking about. I think from Michael. Okay, first of all, sweet classes. Second, I would love to hear your perspective on your role as CMO, specifically where and when do you stay at a more strategic level and delegate? Rest assured, actually, it's a good question. Getting more involved in specific tactics and the selection.
Yeah. I think that's always hard to balance it out. But since I'm pretty new to 1Password right now, I'm trying to get into the weeds a little bit, trying to understand what we're doing from each of the marketing functions perspective. But if I have to, ideally, I'm trying to build out my leadership team, right? once I have all my, direct reports hired, I'm going to focus most of my time thinking about the strategic long-term bets the company needs to take, and it doesn't have to be just the marketing function. It can be, any function. So I'm going to spend a lot of my attention there. Now I'm doing a lot of the, trying to understand the weeds a little bit, but in the long run, I don't think I'll have the capacity to do so, unless there is a problem where you have to go and deep dive, for example, SEO or something like that.
Yeah, makes sense. Right. So next thing I want to talk to you about was hiring, right? So I think we discussed briefly how competitive the market is. I was asking you for candidates, and you said if I had good candidates, I'll probably hire first instead of sending it. Right? So I was genuinely curious. How are you going about it? Tactics that you have to get the good candidates in, because the market is flooded with capital. So what's
It's your network, Kishore. There's no other way. Like, hiring has become incredibly hard right now, and the reason is, like, companies like you are creating so many jobs, right? There are more startups getting funded because it means more jobs getting created. And initial days, like, it was like, I'm talking initial days, like if you go 5 or 10 years back, there was a huge demand of engineers, right? It was hard to find good engineers in the valley. Now, that has creeped to every single function: design, product, marketing. Marketing has become super incredibly hard because the thing we were discussing about, that whole notion as we build an amazing product and customers will come, has changed because there is so much noise in the market. Like, how do you basically distinguish yourself a little bit? So it's primarily, like, to be honest, like tapping your network. I mean, that's the best thing you can do. And then the other aspect which can play a role is, like, what kind of culture you have in the company. Right? I always say this, and it's not my saying; it's someone else's saying. Like, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Like, if you have a horrible culture, great strategy, even first of all, execution will be harder. And then hiring talent will be harder as well. So that the culture as part is super important as well.
But the other part of the question that I want to ask you was, I'm personally still getting at figuring out how to figure out who the best marketing candidates are from the rest, right? Or interviewing and stuff, right? So it's very hard for me to figure out, because everybody talks the same language, like ABM, like SEO, content. Like, it's very hard to figure out who's the right person to come in and execute, right, rather than who's just talking the language, right? So curious if you have any questions that you ask during the interview.
One of my favorite questions when I was at last year, I used to ask this, and I don't have like a flavor of this question right now, but I change it around a little bit. I'll give you an example. I usually ask, and it's more like a case study approach, right? Like, you initially try to understand obviously the resume and the work they have done, and then you go into like a case study format, and you basically ask them, what's their favorite product they use on a daily basis. So that means they're quite familiar with the product, right? They love this product. And then my follow-up question is, like, what do you like from a marketing perspective? What do you don't like from a marketing perspective? What they should do differently? And then I flip it around, because I was part of the bucket team at that time. Take this product and position it for developers. How would you go about positioning it? How would you go about reaching the audience? So more use like a case study form, because if you think about it, honestly, marketing is not rocket science. I mean, it's problem solving at the end. It boils down to problem solving. So if you are assessing a candidate, you can actually ask, and this will also tell you if that person is thinking outside the box. And you can go back and forth. If you understand marketing, you can always go in a different direction based on which direction you want to go. You can also use this flavor based on what function you're hiring for. So if it's product marketing, you basically pivot towards more messaging stuff, right? So yeah, this is I used to use this a lot when I used to hire people in my team because that was a good way to assess like how people think in general.
Interesting. So on that point, Raj, I think the last sort of question I had in the org structure is that I think now we have worked with, both the top-down enterprise sales motion at Palo Alto and then bottoms up at Atlassian and 1Password, right? I think, do you have like a specific playbook or of a team structure that you wish to have, like, or is it different across different go-to-market motions?
I think I think this is the thing I'm trying to figure it, and this is I'm a student right now. You can call me a student. Is like how do you marry the top down and the bottom up motion? I don't think anyone has figured it out, nailed it completely yet. I think there are a few companies in the world, like I think Figma and Notion to some extent, they are doing some experimenting around this. Yeah, you've heard about this concept, like people call SQL, like sales qualified lead, right? That's like a well-known term. Now people are talking PQL. Now think about how do you build like a Salesforce like tool inside, like when you're building the product, you can build a Salesforce like tool inside the product. I mean, that's where the future is headed to some extent. Like it will become, and I'm sure there are a lot of other companies who are like looking into this space, is the whole thing around PQLs is like hard, very hard, incredibly hard to do, right? This whole handover from PQLs to MQLs to SQLs, importing from PQLs to Salesforce, and that is a huge opportunity there. But going back to what you originally asked, I have seen the org structure to be different between bottom up and top down. Top down organizations are much more heavily leans toward revenue and product marketing. Where top down, yes. Bottom up is more heavily leans toward brand, content, and product marketing. So that's the difference of flavor. In one case, marketing plays a significant role in bringing in new customers, into the product. In other case, the sales team doesn't do a lot of the heavy lifting in bringing in customers into the company.
You mean in the bottoms up motion, sales team does? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying the top down motion, the sales team does. Much of the heavy lifting. So the way to think about it, say I keep saying, let's put enterprise and PLG. So the enterprise motion is more many to many selling, right? And the PLG motion is more one-to-one selling.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right. No, that makes sense. So you were saying for PLG, it's very important to have product marketing, content, and brand, right? Whereas in the top down, you'll probably invest more in demand gen kind of aspect.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is. I think you will find a lot of organizations have both because they start with PLG, go to enterprise, and then they have both organizations, and then or either they have enterprise and then they build the brand and content. But interestingly enough, you will see majority of the brand and content is more on the brand, especially is on the corporate marketing side, not on the product, not in the product teams.
Correct.
I think which is changing a little bit now.
Correct, 100%. So on that point about PLG, right? So now at 1Password, are there any channels that you are focusing a lot on to get the self-serve motion up? Is it primarily through content and SEO, or is it through word of mouth, or everything is working out?
I think word of mouth is important. I don't think we have even scratched the surface of Outbound Fury yet. And also it's the ethos of the organization. It's not like a thing you turn it on and everyone starts doing it. It takes time to build. And obviously SEO content is the second piece, which I think we can do a lot more. We're also trying to make the paid side of our marketing more efficient. There are a lot of interesting things also you can do on the paid marketing. So that's better. And in the long run, I want to invest in brand. Build we haven't done a significant brand spend from a company perspective. So that is something I want to invest in the long run as well.
So then so I'm just curious now, how does your team's KPIs look like? Is it more like, hey, let's get the users into the self-serve motion? Is that the primary KPI that everybody.
That is all the PLG. Yeah, exactly. So it's like the things we care about: visitors, signups, and then converting those signups into paid accounts, right?
Correct. Got it.
Between sign up and paid account, like are they active or not to some extent. So that's the way to think. And then after that, it's expansion.
It's demand gen, yeah.
It's retention and expansion.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the sales teams do get involved when the free accounts get into paid version. Is that the typical motion? Yeah.
Yes. So if you look at what a lot of the companies like Figma, Notion, and Password is trying to do, and it's a debate, and I don't think we have time to debate this in general. When do you actually sell to a customer? And Atlassian is of the philosophy is you shouldn't be selling to a customer until the customer uses the product and there is an actual lead for selling. So we had something in Atlassian called product advocates, whose primary job was basically to answer a question. They didn't even carry quota.
Right.
They were not trying to push the product down the customer's throat without the customer trying and understanding the value of the product. One of the things Atlassian did really, really well is invested on the expansion motion, right? So there is this debate, like, do we sell the product, immediately while someone is going through the funnel, or do we sell them later on, right? So, I mean, it's either two schools of thought. Atlassian is of the school of thought that you should be selling them immediately. You should sell them later on. So even there was a situation if IBM picked up the phone and tried to sell the product, you were like, oh, go try out the product.
It's so, yeah, I mean, I can imagine this call being so weird. I'm trying to buy this product. You're asking me to try the self-serve version of it.
Yeah, I don't take any credit for it. It's like Jay Simons, I'm sure you've heard about him, and a bunch of them who, obviously the founders like Scott and Mike, they kind of changed the industry to some extent, especially from a GTM perspective. Yeah.
100%. And then the other question Raja had was, when you guys discuss, I'm sure you meet with your sales counterpart very often. Right? Every week you guys will have a meeting to discuss stuff. But I'm curious, what do you guys usually discuss about in these meetings? Because we are trying to also structure how should sales and marketing speak, and what should the cadence of the meeting look like, right? Yeah. Because we can all give updates and it just doesn't mean anything. But do you have any structure to how the meeting?
So okay, let's put the caveat that we're still figuring it out because we are in the forming and storming stage to some extent. There are a lot of people who are new inside the organization.
Yeah.
But there are two things I think we care about in our motion. Like how many of the people coming to the funnel are of organization size, like more than 20, for example. Right? Because our modus operandi is less than 20, we shouldn't even touch them. Right? More than 20, it should have some kind of touch, sales touch or sales motion. So we spend a lot of time trying to understand the funnel, how many is less than 20 and more than 20, right? And then the other component discussion we have with sales is how many marketing qualified leads we are sending to the sales team. So these are the two usual conversation we have right now. Not ideal. I think we should be talking about a lot of other stuff as well in the long run. But again, as I said, we're still in the forming stage.
Makes sense. But I think this is a good question that I used to grapple with a lot when I was starting it. So if you're a startup, when you're running a one-person show in marketing, what's the first function you would focus on first?
Oh, God, interesting question. Content demand generation or community, given that they feed off each other. I think, assuming that you have figured out your messaging, right? You understand the key messages. I would put energy on the community piece initially. I think community piece is because if you want to fuel the word of mouth. Actually, also depends on what kind of product is.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on If it's a product like ServiceNow, community is not very, I mean, if it's an enterprise motion product, then I will not invest my energy in community in any shape or form, and demand gen would play a huge role. But if it's like a PLG product, like a SaaS PLG product, community will play a huge role, especially in the developer space. In the developer space, like if there's one place that understands community, right? Then B2B, you can argue like it's community or content which plays a bigger role. Content is, I would say content is something I'll pick for not B2B, I mean business audience. If I put it like a business audience, this is where I'm going to, for a tech audience community, is going to be more important.
Interesting. And I think we have one more question, which I think we might add some value. What do you think is the best way to create genuine and effective content marketing with videos and GIFs? Also, what are the good types of branding keywords to use in social content for non-business heavy posts on social? A little tactical, I think, but
yeah, I didn't get the second part, but I get the first part. I think videos are going to become more and more important. In the long run. You'll see a lot of companies have started putting GIFs and animation in their product launches.
Yeah,
it's hard to get people's attention nowadays. The attention span is so small, and this is why this is the generation of TikTok. I was just having a discussion with my wife about this. Like, hey, YouTube is gonna in the long form content is slowly going away. So the video and animation GIFs, from a content perspective, is going to become more and more important.
You know what? I was actually thinking about it. I particularly think right now video is still underutilized in the marketing side of things. So we are trying to be heavy on video marketing, get the product videos out, GIFs, all that stuff should be in video and stuff like long form articles, because I do think people might be a little hesitant to read long article, but might be easier to watch a quick video of sorts and get it over with, right? So cool.
Yeah.
Thanks all for coming to the session. I have one question though. What's your favorite book that you would recommend if people should learn marketing, right?
I don't know if I have any specific book I can recollect which I read about marketing and I said, oh my God, this is the book everyone should read. But there are certain books which I admired and I've learned a lot. One of them was, Walter Isaacson, the person who wrote Steve Jobs' biography. He wrote a book on Da Vinci.
Yeah. That I know.
Yeah, so that book is fascinating. And it's amazing to see how what kind of agency he had. He used to ask himself, every day in the morning he'll get up and write down a list of questions and then try to find answer to those questions. Is when I try to hire, basically I look for agency a lot. So learning how agency is super important and how it drove him. And anyway, it's just a fascinating read. That book is amazing. The other book I read a long time ago, I forgot the author, is this book on servant leadership. And the story was about this businessman who basically just got divorced and lost his job. He basically took some time off, visited a monastery in Nepal, where he came across this guru, basically a monk, who basically taught him about servant leadership, and that book talks about servant leadership. So that is the second book, which
What's it called? Would you know?
I forgot. I have to Kishore. I have to email it to you later. But I'm a voracious reader. I read a lot. The latest book I'm reading, I'm learning so much. I don't know if you've read this book, Kishore, called Why We Sleep.
Oh, interesting. No, I have not read it. No.
So you know how it's glorified in the Silicon Valley that lack of sleep is good, working late nights and coding coding and working all the time. This book talks about how sleep is super important for you to function at your peak.
Right.
And the book talks about what's the role of sleep in general. It's fascinating. Fascinating read. I'm learning so much from that book. I started sleeping for 8 hours. I started doing this thing called biphasic sleep because humans are meant to be, biphasic, like they're supposed to sleep in the afternoon. So whatever the Europeans do, it's basically natural. That's what we're supposed to do as humans. So I try to because I get done early a little bit, and I try to sleep for 15.
No, it's very interesting. I remember reading, some article that comes in newspaper when you're growing up, like, hey, this person wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and does all the work, right? Like
Right.
sleeps for 5 hours, and you try to imitate that. But yeah, good to know. Well, Raj, thanks a lot for coming to the session. Really appreciate it, and really enjoyed chatting with you and sort of knowing more about PLG, because that's been like the talk of the world these days. So thank you so much for coming to the session.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me, Kishore. I really